The thunder crashed overhead like God himself was angry, and 7-year-old Rose pulled her twin sister Lily closer to the wooden door that had just slammed shut in their faces. The rain was coming down in sheets now, soaking through their thin cotton dresses and making their teeth chatter. Rose pressed her ear to the door, hoping to hear their stepmother's footsteps coming back, hoping Eleanor had changed her mind. But all she heard was the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor. Eleanor was barricading the door from the inside. "Rose, I'm scared," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Her dark hair was plastered to her head, and her lips were turning blue from the cold. Rose tried to be brave, the way Mama had always told her to be. "It's okay, Lily. She'll let us back in when the storm passes." "She has to." But even as she said the words, Rose remembered the look in Eleanor's eyes just minutes before. It wasn't the usual annoyance or frustration they'd grown used to over the past 2 years since Papa died. This was something colder, something final. Eleanor had stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her blonde hair perfectly pinned despite the chaos, and delivered the words that would haunt both girls forever. "You're not my blood, and I'm done pretending you matter to me." It had started that morning when Eleanor announced she was selling the house and moving to Denver. A fresh start, she called it, packing her finest dresses into a leather trunk. When Rose asked what would happen to them, Eleanor had laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think I'm taking 2 orphan girls to start my new life? You think any man wants to marry a woman with baggage like you too?" Rose had tried to reason with her, the way she'd learned to do over the years. "But Papa said you'd take care of us. He made you promise before he died." That's when Eleanor's face had turned ugly with anger. "Your father left me nothing but debts and 2 mouths to feed. I kept you alive for 2 years out of charity, and that's more than most would have done. Now I'm finished being your nursemaid." The argument had escalated quickly. Lily had started crying, which always made Eleanor angrier. Eleanor had grabbed both girls by their arms, marched them to the front door, and shoved them outside. "Find somewhere else to be a burden," she'd shouted before slamming the door and turning the lock with a decisive click. Now, huddled together on the covered porch, Rose tried to think of what to do next. The nearest neighbor was Mrs. Henderson, but she lived 2 miles down the muddy road, and she'd never been particularly friendly to them anyway. Most of the townspeople had stopped visiting after Papa died, especially once the whispers started about Eleanor's drinking and the men who came calling at odd hours. "Remember when Mama used to read us stories during thunderstorms?" Rose said, trying to distract her sister from the cold. "She'd make hot cocoa and tell us the thunder was just angels bowling in heaven." Lily managed a small smile through her shivering. "And the lightning was when they got a strike." "That's right." Rose squeezed her sister's hand. They were identical in almost every way. The same dark hair, the same green eyes, the same stubborn chin that Papa always said they got from Mama's side. But Rose had always been the protector, the one who spoke up when Eleanor was being cruel, the one who saved half her supper when Lily was sent to bed without eating. The wind picked up, driving the rain sideways across the porch. Rose knew they couldn't stay here much longer. They were already soaked through, and Lily's lips were getting bluer by the minute. She remembered the old Miller barn about half a mile through the woods. It had been abandoned for years, but it would be dry, and there might even be some old horse blankets left behind. "Lily, we need to go." "Where?" Lily's eyes were wide with fear. "The old Miller place. Remember where Papa used to take us to pick blackberries? The barn is still there." Lily shook her head. "But what if Eleanor comes looking for us? What if she changes her mind?" Rose looked back at the house one more time. Through the window, she could see Eleanor moving around inside, packing boxes with quick, efficient movements. There was no hesitation in her actions, no sign that she regretted what she'd done. Rose realized with a sinking heart that Eleanor had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The timing of the storm wasn't coincidence. It was cover for what she was about to do. "She's not coming back for us, Lily. Look." Lily pressed her face to the window and saw what Rose had seen. Eleanor's wedding ring sitting on the kitchen table next to a stack of papers. She was shedding every reminder of her life with Papa, including his daughters. The girls stood up slowly, their legs stiff from crouching in the cold. Rose took Lily's hand and led her down the porch steps into the driving rain. The mud squelched under their bare feet. Eleanor hadn't even given them time to put on their shoes. Each step was like walking through thick soup, and by the time they reached the edge of the woods, they were covered in mud up to their knees. The old deer path Papa had shown them was barely visible in the storm, but Rose remembered the way. She guided Lily between the trees, their branches providing some shelter from the worst of the rain. Every few steps, Lily would stumble, and Rose would catch her, whispering words of encouragement. Just a little farther. We're almost there. You're being so brave, Lily. When they finally reached the barn, Rose nearly cried with relief. The big wooden doors were hanging open on their hinges, and inside it was dry and warm compared to the storm outside. There were old horse stalls along one wall and a hayloft overhead. Rose found a pile of moldy hay in one corner and several empty burlap sacks that would have to serve as blankets. They huddled together in the driest corner, sharing what little warmth their small bodies could provide. Lily was shaking uncontrollably now, and Rose was worried she might be getting sick. She tried to remember everything Mama had taught her about taking care of people when they were cold and wet. "Tell me about Uncle Jake," Lily whispered through chattering teeth. Rose smiled despite their situation. Uncle Jake was their favorite story, a legendary figure Papa had mentioned only once or twice, but who had grown in their imaginations into a mythical uncle with a ranch somewhere up north. According to Papa's brief mentions, Jake was his older brother who'd gone west to make his fortune and never came back. Rose had elaborated on the story over the years, turning Uncle Jake into a wealthy rancher with hundreds of horses and a house so big it took an hour to walk from one end to the other. Uncle Jake lives in a beautiful valley surrounded by mountains. Rose began, her voice steady despite her own fear. He has a ranch with more horses than you can count, and apple trees as far as the eye can see. The house is painted white with green shutters, and there's a big front porch with rocking chairs where you can sit and watch the sunset. And he's been waiting for us, Lily added, her voice getting drowsy. That's right. He's been waiting for us to come find him. And tomorrow, when the storm passes, we're going to start walking north until we find him. Lily closed her eyes, finally started to warm up a little. Promise we'll find him, Rose? Rose looked out through the open barn doors at the storm that seemed to be getting worse instead of better. She thought about the long road ahead, the dangers they might face, and the very real possibility that Uncle Jake was just a story Papa had told to make them feel less alone in the world. But looking down at her sister's trusting face, she knew there was only one answer she could give. I promise, Lily, we're going to find Uncle Jake, and he's going to take care of us the way Papa would have wanted. Outside, the thunder rolled on, but inside the barn, two little girls clung to each other and dreamed of a better tomorrow. They had no way of knowing that their journey north would lead them to something even better than the mythical Uncle Jake. It would lead them to a man who would prove that family isn't always about blood, but about the people who choose to love you no matter what. Rose woke up first as the gray light of dawn crept through the barn doors. Her whole body ached from sleeping on the hard ground, and her dress was still damp from the storm. Lily was curled up beside her, breathing softly but with a slight wheeze that made Rose worry. They had survived their first night alone, but Rose knew the real test was just beginning. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that smelled fresh and clean but looked more dangerous in the daylight. Rose could see just how far they were from anything familiar. The woods stretched in every direction, as she tried to remember which way Papa had said Uncle Jake's ranch was supposed to be. North, she was pretty sure. Always north. She gently shook Lily awake. Come on, sleepyhead. We need to get moving while it's still cool. Lily opened her eyes slowly, and Rose's heart sank when she saw how pale her sister looked. I don't feel good, Rose. My throat hurts. Rose pressed her hand to Lily's forehead the way Mama used to do. She felt warm, but Rose wasn't sure if that was from fever or just from sleeping so close together. Either way, they couldn't stay in the barn forever. Someone might come looking for them, or worse, Eleanor might send a sheriff after them claiming they'd run away. I know you don't feel good, but we have to keep going. Remember what I told you about Uncle Jake? He's waiting for us, and the sooner we get there, the sooner you can rest in a real bed. Rose helped Lily to her feet and brushed the hay from their dresses. They looked like two little scarecrows, all dirty and rumpled, but there wasn't much they could do about that now. Rose found a rusty bucket in one of the stalls that still held some rainwater from the storm. It tasted like metal, but it was wet, and they were both desperately thirsty. Before they left the barn, Rose looked around for anything that might be useful. She found a piece of rope that wasn't too rotted and tied it around her waist like a belt. In one of the stalls, she discovered a small burlap sack that she could carry their few possessions in. Not that they had many. Just the clothes on their backs and the small silver locket that had belonged to their mother, which Rose wore around her neck hidden under her dress. The first day of walking was harder than Rose had imagined. The dirt roads were muddy from the rain, making every step a struggle. Lily tried her best to keep up, but Rose could tell she was getting weaker as the day wore on. They stopped frequently to rest and to pick wild berries when they found them. Rose remembered Papa teaching them which ones were safe to eat, but there weren't many, and they were barely enough to quiet the growing hunger in their stomachs. By afternoon, Lily was stumbling more often, and her breathing was getting worse. Rose was starting to panic when she spotted smoke rising from a chimney about a mile off the road. It was a small farmhouse with a vegetable garden and a few chickens pecking in the yard. Rose's heart leaped with hope. Maybe these people would help them, give them some food and water, maybe even let them rest for a while. The farmer's wife who answered the door was a plump woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron. She took one look at the two bedraggled girls and immediately invited them inside. "Oh, you poor dears. Look at the state of you. Come in, come in." The warmth of the kitchen was like heaven after the cold night and long day of walking. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Cooper, sat them down at her wooden table and brought them each a bowl of warm soup and a thick slice of fresh bread. Rose had never tasted anything so wonderful in her life. "Now then," Mrs. Cooper said, settling into a chair across from them, "were two little girls doing wandering around the countryside all by themselves? Where are your parents?" Rose had practiced this story in her head during the long walk. "Our mama and papa died, ma'am. We're going to live with our Uncle Jake up north. He has a ranch, and he's expecting us." Mrs. Cooper's face softened with sympathy. "Oh, you poor children, and you're walking all that way by yourselves? How far is this ranch?" Rose realized she didn't actually know. Papa had never said exactly where Uncle Jake lived, just that it was north, somewhere in the mountains. It's a ways yet, ma'am. But we're strong, and we can make it." Mrs. Cooper looked doubtful. "Well, you can't possibly walk all that way in your condition. Look at your sister. She's clearly coming down with something. Why don't you stay here tonight, and I'll have my husband take you part of the way in the wagon tomorrow." For a moment, Rose allowed herself to hope. These people seemed genuinely kind, and the idea of riding in a wagon instead of walking sounded like a miracle. But then she heard heavy footsteps on the front porch, and Mrs. Cooper's expression changed. "That'll be my husband coming in for supper," she said, but something in her voice had shifted. The man who came through the door was tall and stern-looking, with suspicious eyes that immediately fixed on the two girls. "What's this, Martha? Who are these children?" Mrs. Cooper explained quickly about finding them at the door, but her husband's frown only deepened as she spoke. When she mentioned Uncle Jake and the ranch up north, he shook his head firmly. "I don't like it, Martha. Two children wandering around with some story about a relative nobody's ever heard of? They're probably runaways. Could be thieves or worse. We could get in trouble for harboring them. Oh, Harold, look at them. They're just babies. They couldn't harm a fly." But Harold Cooper was unmoved. "That's exactly what they want you to think. I've heard about children being used by criminals to case houses when people's trust. No, I won't have it. They'll have to move along." Rose felt her heart breaking as she watched the kindness drain from Mrs. Cooper's face, replaced by uncertainty and fear. "But Harold, it's getting dark, and the little one is sick. Not our problem, Martha. We got our own family to think about." Mrs. Cooper packed them each a small bundle of food, more bread, some dried meat, and a few apples, but her hands were shaking as she did it. "I'm sorry, girls. I truly am. I hope you find your uncle safely." Rose took Lily's hand and led her back out into the gathering dusk. They hadn't made it far from the farmhouse when Lily finally collapsed, her legs simply giving out beneath her. Rose caught her and helped her to sit on a fallen log beside the road. "I can't, Rose," Lily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I can't walk anymore. I'm too tired and too sick." Rose knelt in front of her sister, fighting back her own tears. They had been walking for 3 days now, surviving on berries and stream water and the occasional kindness of strangers. Lily's fever was definitely getting worse, and Rose was beginning to doubt her own ability to keep them both safe. But then she remembered the stories their father used to tell about the old days, about pioneers who crossed the entire continent with nothing but determination and hope. She thought about their mother, who had been so brave when she was sick, never complaining, always smiling for her daughters, even when Rose could see the pain in her eyes. "Do you remember what Mama used to say about being brave?" Rose asked, brushing the tears from Lily's cheeks. Lily nodded weakly. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going even when you are scared." "That's right. And we're going to keep going because Uncle Jake is out there somewhere, and he's going to take care of us. I can feel it." Rose helped Lily to her feet, and they continued walking as the sun set behind them. They had no idea that they were only one day away from the town of Silver Ridge, or that in that town was a sheriff who had been asking questions about 2 missing girls. They had no way of knowing that their stepmother Eleanor had reported them as runaways, claiming they had stolen money from her before disappearing. All they knew was that they had each other, they had hope, and they had a destination that existed somewhere beyond the next hill, the next bend in the road, the next sunrise. As the stars came out overhead, Rose began telling Lily another story about Uncle Jake's ranch, about the horses they would ride and the apple pies they would eat and the warm beds that were waiting for them. But what neither of them could have imagined was that by tomorrow night, they would meet a man who would change their lives forever. A man who had been searching for them just as desperately as they had been searching for safety. A man who would prove that sometimes the family you need finds you when you least expect it. The road stretched ahead of them in the moonlight, leading north toward their uncertain future and a destiny that was already riding south to meet them. By the time Rose and Lily stumbled into the dusty main street of Silver Ridge, they looked more like 2 little ghosts than living children. 4 days of walking had left them hollow-eyed and gaunt, their dresses torn and stained with mud and grass. Rose was practically carrying Lily now, whose fever had gotten so bad that she was barely conscious most of the time. The town was bigger than anything they had seen on their journey. Maybe 30 buildings lined up along a wide dirt street, with wooden sidewalks and hitching posts for horses. There was a general store, a saloon, a hotel, and what looked like a sheriff's office with a tin star hanging over the door. Rose's heart sank when she saw that star. She remembered Mrs. Cooper's husband talking about runaways and trouble, and she had a bad feeling that their stepmother might have sent word ahead. Rose guided Lily toward the livery stable at the end of the street. It was the biggest building in town, with wide doors that stood open to let in the afternoon breeze. The smell of hay and horses reminded her of home, back when they had a home. Maybe the stable owner would let them rest for a few minutes, or at least give them some water. But as they approached the stable, Rose heard voices coming from the sheriff's office behind them. She turned and saw a tall man in a badge talking to the hotel keeper, and she caught enough words to make her blood run cold. 2 little girls, missing for 4 days now. Stepmother's worried, sick, reward for information. Rose quickly pulled Lily into the shadows between 2 buildings. Her sister was burning up with fever now, mumbling things that didn't make sense, and Rose knew she couldn't keep going much longer. They needed help, but she was terrified that asking for it would get them sent back to Eleanor. "Rose," Lily's voice was so weak it was barely a whisper. "Are we there yet? Is Uncle Jake coming?" Rose's heart was breaking. She had tried so hard to be strong, to keep them both going with stories and hope, but the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Uncle Jake might not even exist. Papa had mentioned him so few times, and always in such vague ways. What if he had just been telling stories to make them feel less alone in the world? "Soon, Lily. We're getting close now." But even as she said it, Rose could see the sheriff coming their way, asking questions at each building. He would find them soon, and then what? Would he believe their story, or would he just see 2 runaway children who needed to be returned to their legal guardian? Rose made a decision. They would hide in the livery stable until dark, and then they would slip out of town and keep heading north. Maybe they would find Uncle Jake, or maybe they would find someone else who would help them. All she knew was that they couldn't go back to Eleanor. The livery stable was dim and cool inside, filled with the gentle sounds of horses munching hay and shifting in their stalls. Rose found an empty stall in the back corner and helped Lily lie down on a pile of fresh straw. Her sister's breathing was getting more labored, and her skin felt like it was on fire. Rose was trying to figure out what to do next when she heard footsteps coming into the stable. Heavy boots on the wooden floor, moving with purpose. Rose held her breath and tried to make herself as small as possible, pulling Lily closer. "I know you're in here," a deep voice said quietly. "I saw you come in, and I know you're scared. But I'm not going to hurt you." Rose's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. She peeked over the edge of the stall and saw a man standing in the center aisle, looking around carefully. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. He wore simple ranch clothes, denim pants, a cotton shirt, and boots that had seen hard use. But it was his eyes that caught Rose's attention. They were kind eyes, the sort that reminded her of her father. "My name is Daniel Stone," the man continued, still speaking in that calm, gentle voice. "I've been looking for two little girls who might be in trouble. Girls with dark hair and green eyes, about 7 years old. Twins, maybe." Rose felt her breath catch. How could he know what they looked like? How could he know they were twins? "I'm not with the sheriff," Daniel said, as if he could read her thoughts. "And I'm not here to take you back to anyone who's been hurting you. I think you might be the family I've been searching for." Something in his voice made Rose believe him. Maybe it was the way he spoke, like he was talking to grown-ups instead of just children. Maybe it was the careful way he moved, making sure not to startle them. Or maybe it was just that she was so tired and scared and desperate that she wanted to believe someone could help them. Rose stood up slowly, still keeping one hand on Lily's shoulder. "Who are you looking for?" Daniel's face lit up when he saw her, and Rose was surprised to see what looked like tears in his eyes. "I've been looking for my cousin's daughters. Thomas Murphy's girls, Rose and Lily." Rose felt the world tilt around her. Papa's name was Thomas Murphy. "Then I found you." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. "I've been searching for you since I heard about your father's death. I've been to 6 different towns asking questions, following rumors. I was starting to think I'd never find you." Rose wanted to believe him, but she had learned to be careful about trusting adults. "How do we know you're telling the truth? How do we know you're really our cousin?" Daniel nodded approvingly. "That's a smart question. Your father always said you were the careful one, Rose. He told me you looked after your sister like a little mother." The fact that he knew her name, knew about her protective nature, made Rose's defenses start to crumble. "Papa talked about you. Not often, but sometimes. He wrote me a letter about 3 years ago, telling me about your mother's death and how he was managing on his own with you girls. He was so proud of you both. He said Rose was brave and smart, and Lily was gentle and sweet, with a laugh that could light up a whole room. That was Papa, all right." Rose felt tears starting to fall. "But Papa never mentioned any letters. He never said you were looking for us." Daniel's face grew sad. "I wrote back immediately, but I think the letter got lost. Mail service isn't very reliable out here. Then when I heard about Thomas's accident, I started trying to find you right away. But your stepmother had already moved you away from the old place, and nobody seemed to know where you'd gone." Rose looked down at Lily, who was barely conscious now, her breathing shallow and quick. "She threw us out. Eleanor said we weren't her blood, and she didn't want us anymore." The look that crossed Daniel's face was like a thunderstorm. "She what?" 4 days ago, during the big storm, she locked us out of the house and told us to find somewhere else to be a burden." Daniel knelt down beside the stall, bringing himself to Rose's eye level. "Listen to me very carefully, Rose. What that woman did to you is wrong. No adult should ever throw children out to fend for themselves. You and Lily are not burdens. You're precious, and you deserve to be loved and protected." Rose had been holding back her tears for 4 days, trying to be strong for Lily, but something about Daniel's words broke down all her careful walls. She started sobbing, all the fear and exhaustion and desperation pouring out of her at once. Daniel didn't try to touch her or hush her. He just waited patiently until the storm passed. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You've been so brave, carrying all this by yourself. But you don't have to anymore." When Rose finally looked up, Daniel was holding out a clean handkerchief. "Now, let me take a look at your sister. I've got some medical training from my time in the cavalry, and she looks like she needs help right away." Daniel examined Lily with gentle, practiced hands, checking her temperature and listening to her breathing. "She's got pneumonia, I think. We need to get her somewhere warm and dry, with medicine and proper food. Can you trust me to help you?" Rose looked into his eyes and saw nothing but genuine concern and kindness. After 4 days of fear and rejection, it felt like a miracle to find someone who wanted to help instead of turn them away. "We were looking for Uncle Jake," she said. "Papa used to tell stories about his brother who had a ranch up north." Daniel smiled sadly. "Uncle Jake was my father, Rose. He died 2 years ago and left me his ranch. I think your papa might have been telling you stories about the place where I live now." Rose felt something click into place, like a puzzle piece finding its home. "So I'm your family. Not Uncle Jake, but close enough. And I've got a ranch about a day's ride north of here, with plenty of room for 2 little girls who need a place to belong." Just then, they heard voices outside the stable. The sheriff was getting closer, asking the stable owner if he'd seen any strangers in town. Daniel's expression grew serious. "That's Sheriff Morrison. He's a good man, but he's got word from your stepmother that you're runaways. We need to get you out of here before he finds you, at least until I can straighten this whole mess out legally." Daniel scooped Lily up in his strong arms, as if she weighed nothing at all. "My horse is out back. Can you ride, Rose?" Rose nodded, even though she'd only been on a horse a few times in her life. Right now, she would have ridden a wild buffalo if it meant getting Lily the help she needed. As Daniel carried them toward the back of the stable, Rose heard him whisper something that made her heart soar with hope. "I've been looking for you two my whole life, and I didn't even know it. But now that I've found you, I'm never letting anyone hurt you again." For the first time in 4 days, Rose allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, their nightmare was finally over. Daniel's ranch was nothing like the fairy tale palace Rose had imagined when she told Lily stories about Uncle Jake. But somehow, it was even better. The house was a simple 2-story wooden building with a wide front porch and green shutters that needed painting. There were apple trees in the yard, just like in Rose's stories, and mountains rising up all around the valley like protective arms. It felt like home in a way that nowhere had felt since Papa died. The ride from Silver Ridge had taken most of the day, with Lily wrapped in Daniel's coat and cradled in his arms while Rose sat behind him on the big bay horse. They had taken back roads and cattle trails to avoid the main routes where the sheriff might look for them. Daniel had talked quietly the whole way, telling them about the ranch, about the horses and cattle, about the hired hand named Joe who helped him run the place. "Joe's getting on in years, but he's good with children," Daniel had said. "Lost his own grandchildren to scarlet fever a few years back. I think he'd be happy to have some young voices around the place again." Now, as Daniel carried Lily into the house, Rose got her first look at what might become their new home. The front room was comfortable and lived in, with a stone fireplace and simple wooden furniture that looked handmade. There were books on shelves, which made Rose happy. Papa had always said that a house without books wasn't really a home. But what caught her attention most was the small framed photograph on the mantel, showing a young man in a military uniform standing next to a pretty woman holding a baby. Daniel noticed her looking at it. "That's my wife Sarah and my son Michael. They died in a wagon accident 3 years ago." Rose felt her heart clench with sympathy. No wonder Daniel's eyes sometimes looked so sad, even when he was smiling. He understood what it was like to lose the people you loved most. Daniel carried Lily upstairs to a small bedroom that looked like it had been waiting for someone to fill it. The bed was made with a colorful quilt, and there were simple curtains at the window that let in the afternoon sunlight. He laid Lily down gently and covered her with blankets, then went to get his medical supplies. While Daniel tended to Lily's fever and gave her medicine for her breathing, Rose explored the house. Her own room was right next to Lily's, with the same kind of quilt and curtains. There was even a small wooden chest at the foot of the bed, empty and waiting for her belongings, if she ever had any belongings again. Downstairs, Daniel was preparing soup and tea in a kitchen that was bigger than their whole house had been with Eleanor. Rose sat at the wooden table and watched him work, still hardly believing that any of this was real. "Daniel," she said finally, "can you tell me more about Papa and Uncle Jake? I'm still confused about how we're all connected." Daniel set a bowl of warm soup in front of her and settled into the chair across the table. "Your papa and my father were brothers, but there was a big age difference between them. Jake was 15 years older than Thomas. So by the time your father was old enough to remember much, Jake had already headed west to make his fortune." Rose nodded, starting to piece things together. "So Papa really did have a brother named Jake." "He did. And Jake really did have a ranch. This ranch, he started it from nothing back in 1862, built it up over 20 years until it was one of the biggest spreads in the territory. But Jake never married, never had children of his own. We got sick with lung fever 2 years ago. He left everything to me." "But why you? Were you his son?" Daniel shook his head. "Jake was my father's older brother too, but on my mother's side. So he was your papa's brother and my uncle both, just through different family lines. When my wife and son died, I came out here to work for Jake, and he took me in like a son. On his deathbed, he made me promise to look after any family that might come looking for help." Rose felt tears starting again. "So Uncle Jake really was waiting for us in a way." "In a way, yes. And when I heard about your father's death, I knew I had to find you. Jake had told me stories about his little brother Thomas and his twin daughters. He always wondered what happened to you all, whether you were safe and happy." Rose pulled the silver locket from under her dress. "Papa gave this to me before he died. He said it had our mother's picture in it, but also something else that was important." Daniel leaned forward as Rose opened the tiny clasp. Inside was indeed a small photograph of their mother, but tucked behind, it was a folded piece of paper no bigger than Rose's thumbnail. Daniel carefully unfolded it, and Rose saw that it was covered in Papa's careful handwriting. "It's an address," Daniel said, his voice filled with wonder. "Look, Jake Murphy, Paradise Valley Ranch, Silver Ridge Territory. Your father kept Jake's address all these years, probably meaning to write or visit someday." "Paradise Valley," Rose whispered. "That's what you call this place." "That's what Jake called it, and the name stuck. He used to say it was the closest thing to heaven he expected to find on earth." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Rose eating her soup and Daniel checking on Lily every few minutes. The medicine was working. Her fever was breaking, and she was sleeping more peacefully than she had in days. As the sun started to set, casting golden light through the kitchen windows, Rose finally asked the question that had been weighing on her heart. "Daniel, what's going to happen to us now? I mean, Eleanor is our legal guardian, isn't she? Won't the law say we have to go back to her?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Eleanor Murphy lost any legal right to you the moment she threw you out of the house to fend for yourselves. What she did was abandonment, and it's against the law. But more than that, I've got Jake's will, which specifically mentions looking after any Murphy family members who might need help. And I've got that address in your locket, which proves your father intended for you to come here if anything happened to him. But what if she comes looking for us? What if she brings the sheriff? Then we'll be ready for her. I've sent word to a lawyer in Denver, a good man who helped Jake with his legal affairs. He's going to help me file papers to become your legal guardian. Eleanor will have to prove she can provide a safe, loving home for you girls. And from what you've told me, that's something she can't do." Rose felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized was there. For the first time since Papa died, she was starting to believe that she and Lily might actually be safe. "There's something else," Daniel continued. "I want you to know that this isn't charity, Rose. You and Lily aren't burdens that I'm taking on out of duty. You're family, and this is where you belong. Jake always said this ranch needed children's laughter to make it complete, and I think he was right. That night, after Lily's fever had broken completely and she was sleeping peacefully in her new bed, Rose stood on the front porch with Daniel and looked out over Paradise Valley. The mountains were dark silhouettes against the starry sky, and somewhere in the distance she could hear cattle lowing softly. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's home," Daniel replied, "for all of us." But even as Rose allowed herself to feel hopeful for the first time in years, Neither she nor Daniel noticed the lone rider watching them from the ridge overlooking the valley. Eleanor Murphy had been asking questions in Silver Ridge, and she had learned some very interesting things about Daniel Stone and his supposedly vast inheritance. If there was money involved, ranch money, cattle money, land money, then Eleanor wanted a share, and she knew exactly how to get it. The confrontation that would determine the girl's fate was still 2 days away, but it was coming as surely as the sunrise. Eleanor Murphy wasn't the type of woman to give up easily, especially when there was profit to be made from her stubborn refusal to let go. Rose was helping Daniel feed the chickens when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. Something about it made her stomach clench with fear. They had been at the ranch for a week now, the happiest week of Rose's life since before Mama died. But that dust cloud looked like trouble coming their way. Daniel saw it too and set down the bucket of chicken feed. "Rose, take Lily inside and stay there until I tell you it's safe to come out." "Is it Eleanor?" "I think so. But remember, she doesn't have any legal right to take you anywhere. I've got papers from the lawyer now." From the upstairs window, Rose watched 3 riders approach. Eleanor was in the lead, wearing her best dress, followed by Sheriff Morrison and a man in a fancy suit who looked like a lawyer. Daniel walked out to meet them, tension visible in his shoulders. Eleanor called out in her sweetest voice, "Mr. Stone, I've come for my daughters." "They're not your daughters, Mrs. Murphy. You abandoned them during a thunderstorm. That makes you unfit to be their guardian." Eleanor climbed down gracefully, smoothing her skirts. "I did no such thing. These girls ran away in the middle of the night. I've been worried sick." Rose's hands clenched into fists. How could Eleanor lie so easily? Sheriff Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Now, Mr. Stone, Mrs. Murphy is their legal guardian. If she says they ran away, then she's lying," Daniel interrupted. "Sheriff, these girls were thrown out with no shoes, no food, no shelter. They nearly died of exposure." The fancy lawyer stepped forward. "I'm Harold Wickham, Mrs. Murphy's attorney. Mr. Stone, you have no legal standing here. These children belong with their appointed guardian." Daniel pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Actually, I do have legal standing. This is a guardianship petition filed with the territorial court, along with evidence of Mrs. Murphy's abandonment. I also have a medical report documenting their condition when I found them." Eleanor's confident expression faltered. She hadn't expected him to be prepared. "Furthermore," Daniel continued, "I have evidence that Mrs. Murphy collected substantial life insurance when her husband died and has been telling people she plans to move to Denver and start fresh." Sheriff Morrison's eyes narrowed. "That true, Mrs. Murphy?" Eleanor's sweet mask was slipping. "I want my daughters returned immediately, or I'll have you arrested for kidnapping. Go ahead and try. But first, let's ask the girls what they want." "Rose, Lily, come down here, please." Rose took Lily's hand and led her outside. The moment Eleanor saw them, her expression changed completely. Gone was the worried stepmother act. "Girls, come here this instant. We're going home." Lily shrank back against Rose. "We are home," Rose said quietly. "Daniel is our family." Eleanor's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't be ridiculous. You're coming with me right now, or there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Sheriff Morrison asked, doubt creeping into his voice. Daniel's voice was deadly calm. "Mrs. Murphy, could you explain to the sheriff exactly what happened the night these girls left your house?" "They ran away." "I told you." "Really? So you didn't tell them they weren't your blood? You didn't push them outside during a thunderstorm and lock the door?" Eleanor's face went white, then red. "Who told you that?" Lily suddenly stepped forward, her small voice carrying clearly. "She said we were burdens. She said no man would want to marry her if she had to take care of us. She pushed us outside." Sheriff Morrison looked at Eleanor with disgust. "Ma'am, is that true?" Eleanor realized her story was falling apart. "Even if it is, they're still legally mine." "Actually," Daniel said, "I have Jake Murphy's will, which mentions providing for any Murphy family members in need. And a letter these girls' father wrote asking Jake to watch over them." Eleanor was getting frantic. "I don't care about any of that. They're mine by law." She lunged forward, trying to grab Rose's arm, but Daniel stepped between them. touch one of these children, and I'll have you arrested for assault." Sheriff Morrison looked tired. "Ma'am, if these children say you abandoned them, and this gentleman has legal papers, I don't see any crime here except possibly by you." Eleanor's lawyer grabbed her arm. "Eleanor, we need to leave. We'll fight this in court." "Fine. But this isn't over, Mr. Stone. Those girls are worth money to me. When this goes to court, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are, living alone with two young girls." Daniel's face darkened. "Are you threatening to spread lies about me?" Eleanor smiled coldly. "I'm pointing out that a single man might not be appropriate. Questions might be raised about your motives." Rose felt sick. Eleanor was threatening to ruin Daniel's reputation just to get money. "Let them raise questions," Daniel said calmly. "Any judge will see how happy and healthy they are here. Can you say the same about yourself, Mrs. Murphy?" As Eleanor rode away in anger, Daniel knelt and gathered both girls in his arms. "She's gone, and she can't take you anywhere you don't want to go. What if the judge believes her lies?" Rose whispered. Daniel looked her straight in the eyes. "Then we'll tell the truth and trust that truth is stronger than lies. You're my family now, and I'll fight for you with everything I have." The courtroom in Denver was packed with people, more than Rose had ever seen in one place. Word had spread about the custody case, and it seemed like half the territory had come to watch. Daniel sat beside them at the wooden table, looking calm and confident in his best suit. Rose held Lily's hand tightly as they watched Eleanor enter with her fancy lawyer, still putting on her act of being the concerned stepmother. Judge Harrison was an older man with kind eyes and gray whiskers who reminded Rose a little of her papa. He listened patiently as Eleanor's lawyer painted Daniel as a dangerous stranger who had kidnapped two innocent children. But when it was Daniel's lawyer's turn to speak, the real story came out. "Your Honor, we have medical evidence that these children were suffering from malnutrition and exposure when Mr. Stone found them. We have testimony from Mrs. Cooper, who fed them and saw their condition. Most importantly, we have the girls' own testimony about what really happened that night." When Rose was called to testify, her legs felt like jelly, but Daniel gave her an encouraging nod, and she found her courage. In a clear, strong voice, she told the judge exactly what Eleanor had said and done. She showed him Papa's letter address in Mama's locket. She explained how Daniel had saved Lily's life and given them both a real home. Lily was too shy to speak much, but when the judge asked her gently where she wanted to live, her answer was simple and clear: with Daniel. He makes us feel safe. The judge also heard from Sheriff Morrison, who had investigated Eleanor's claims and found them false. He heard from the doctor who had examined the girls when they first arrived at the ranch. Most damaging of all, he heard from Eleanor's former neighbors, who testified about her drinking, her men friends, and her obvious neglect of the children. When Eleanor took the stand to defend herself, she made everything worse. She couldn't keep her story straight, got angry when pressed for details, and finally blurted out, "Why should I have to raise another woman's children when I never wanted them in the first place?" The moment those words left her mouth, Rose knew they had won. Judge Harrison deliberated for less than an hour. When he returned, his decision was swift and final. "Mrs. Murphy, by your own admission, you abandoned these children during a dangerous storm. Your claim to love and want them is contradicted by your own words and actions. Mr. Stone, on the other hand, has provided these girls with medical care, education, and a loving home. The court hereby terminates Mrs. Murphy's guardianship and grants full custody to Daniel Stone." Rose felt like she might faint with relief. Lily burst into happy tears, and Daniel swept them both in his arms right there in the courtroom. 3 months later, Rose stood on the front porch of their home in Paradise Valley, watching Daniel teach Lily how to properly saddle her pony. The fall air was crisp and clean, and the apple trees were heavy with fruit. Rose had started school in Silver Ridge and was already at the top of her class. Lily had grown 2 inches and laughed every single day. Daniel had legally adopted them both, making them Rose Stone and Lily Stone. They had real birth certificates now, real legal protection, and most importantly, they had a father who would never let anyone hurt them again. Eleanor had disappeared somewhere back east after losing in court. Her fancy lawyer had abandoned her, when she couldn't pay his fees and the insurance money had run out faster than she'd expected. Rose sometimes wondered what had become of her, but mostly she didn't think about Eleanor at all anymore. That evening, as they sat down to dinner in their warm, bright kitchen, Daniel asked them to bow their heads for grace. "Dear Lord," he said, "thank you for bringing these girls home to me. Thank you for making us a family. Help us always remember that love isn't about blood, it's about choice. And I choose these girls today and every day. Amen," Rose and Lily said together. Rose looked around the table at her real family and smiled. They had traveled so far from that terrible stormy night when Eleanor had thrown them out. They had been scared and hungry and lost, but they had found their way to exactly where they belonged. Home wasn't a place on a map. Home was where people loved you no matter what, where you were safe and wanted and cherished. Home was Paradise Valley and Daniel, and the promise that tomorrow would be even better than today.